Welcome, everyone, to the University of Minnesota China Center's Considering China webinar. I'm Joan Brzezinski, and I'm the director of the China Center. We're delighted to have Sam Xu here today to share his thoughts on U.S. businesses in China through his talk, A Global Business's Journey During China's Rise, Strategic Considerations Amid U.S.-China Tensions. Thank you for joining us today and for your support of the China Center. It's your kind time and generosity that helps make programs like this possible. I offer a special thanks to Kai Mei and Joseph Terry for their generous support of this program. And we invite you to help us advance our mission and to give to the China Center through the link on the webinar announcement or on our website. At the end of the program, we'll conduct a little bit of Q&A. Please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. If you have a technical difficulty or need help, you can use the chat and someone will respond. Our speaker, Sam Xu, is the Executive Vice President in Strategy Planning for Ecolab Incorporated. And Ecolab is a global leader in water hygiene and infection prevention solutions and services that help protect the people, planet, and business health. During his 26-year career with Ecolab, Mr. Xu has held several leadership positions in global services, business, global strategy planning, commercial digital solutions, Greater China, international healthcare, Latin America treasury and corporate development. Originally from Taiwan, he is a graduate of National Taiwan University and holds a master's degree in business administration from the Kellogg School of Management at Northwestern University. He also completed a leading global business executive program at Harvard Business School. We're excited to hear his perspectives on U.S. business leadership and strategies for their investments, activities, and business in China over the years and how recent changes in the U.S.-China relations have impacted those strategies. Welcome, Sam.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the University of Minnesota China Center inviting me to share with you a little bit of thoughts from the kind of a timely topic. So as you know, China has risen significantly over the last few decades. However, for many multinational companies or global companies, China is not a home market. So driving the growth journey in China is not the smooth ride or straightforward from the perspective. So we'll utilize Ecolab China as a kind of example to talk about how we drive the transformation and to make the significant pivot from the perspective. The other key topic we'll talk about really, as you know, that as the U.S.-China tension intensifying significantly over the last few years. So through that perspective, the challenges have become more complex. So what would be the global business or multinational company to think about the strategic consideration to thrive in such an environment? So let's dive into those two topics quickly and provide you certain perspective from the perspective. So if you look at this chart, really the GDP comparison, the blue line is the US GDP and the red line is the China GDP. The gap between the US China continue to narrowing over the years. So right now, the number one, number two, significantly above all the other countries. So the gap between the top two versus the other are widening from the perspective. So the other key consideration is that China has lots of human capital. So think about the population, 1.4 billion people versus US 330 million. And the GDP per capita increased significantly. Last year was $13,000 in China versus US is $69,000 in the United States. So the other facts really urbanization really moving significantly. So last year achieving 65% and aiming to be 70% by 2030. So even with such the low urbanization compared to US 83%, there are lots of the cities with the population more than 1 million. So there are 155 cities in China have that kind of status. And the other dimension you think about the aging population with one-child policy implement for a while. So currently the aging population 60 years or older is roughly around 18%, which might potentially go up to the 39%, 40% by 2050. So that's kind of a few factors from the facts from the perspective. So let's look at how fast China really moving from that perspective. If you look at a GDP per capita, give you the velocity about how fast the economic growth. So China achieved the GDP per capita more than $1,000 in 2001. and then double within 5 years by 2006, and then achieved the $5,000 per capita in 2011, and then moved to the $10,000 per capita by 2019. So that's how fast really moving from the perspective. So give you a flavor on that. And then the other key things, if you look at the history, the China, the rise really coming from mainly the late 90s to now. It's not earlier. So that the People's Republic of China established in 1949, then went through the Great Leap Forward and then Cultural Revolution, and then start to open the market for the foreign direct investment in 1978. Then the Shenzhen Economic Zone developed, opened up in 1980s. Then Pudong Economic Zone opened up in 1993. So all the economic activity mainly really happened, as I talked about earlier, so after the 1995 from the perspective. The other things you could see that in here, there's a China one-child policy really from the 1978 to 2015, which is that they talked about the aging population issue from the perspective. So after 2001, joined the World Trade Organization, start to really become involved in the global trade dynamics from the perspective, and gradually evolve, become the global manufacturing center, and then move to the world stage in 2008, support the Beijing Olympic Game, and then 2010 Shanghai World Expo, and then continue driving the technology expansion from the perspective. On the chart, you could also see that a little bit that from the economic perspective, the before the 1990s, really if you want to have a clothes, the cooking oil, etc., you need to have those kind of ticket from that perspective. And then dual currency for the foreigners before 1995 need to use a different currency. We call that Waihui Jian versus local currency. That's kind of component is that the majority, the economic fast growing really take place over the last 25 years from the perspective. So based on that, how the other key dimension when you think about the China rising, the leaders also play the critical role, and then their approach, their attitude, how they drive is kind of important. If you think about the Deng Xiaoping era, really focus on hide your strengths, buy your time, and then pivot toward to the when the Hu Jintao area really talked about the rise of great powers, and then the move to the Xi Jinping eras really talk about that China can look at the world head up. So that's kind of different attitude, different kind of approach in dealing with the global dynamics. And one more thing is when we think about the China rise, China definitely is a plain economy. So all the important things really think about how the government really plan the economy going forward. So everybody wants to know what's going on in China, must pay attention to the 5-year plan. So on this page, you can see that a little bit that the 5-year plan goes through the different kind of a period. What the target, what's the realize that the performance of the KPI from the perspective. So a quick summary over the 5-year plan. If you look at a 10-year 5-year plan, 10th 5-year plan really focus on the macroeconomic growth, the technology, education, development, and then sustainability and people's well-being. The 11th 5-year plan really focus on economic growth, economic structures, the human capital, environmental protection, and the people's well-being. And 12th 5-year plan focus on economic development, technology, educations, sustainability, then people's well-being. 13th 5-year plan really the economic growth, innovation, people's well-being, sustainability, environmental protection. So you can see that the key agenda really focus on how to really accelerate the society to be modernized and then driving the people's well-being, promote the technology, promote the sustainability, etc. So every 5-year plan, they have the KPI, talk about target, and then measure what the performance. So you could see that every 5-year plan and the driving similar agenda. So that's give you a little kind of background talk about what the China rise really means from that perspective. So now let's use the Ecolab China as a case to think about how the Ecolab China performed. So before we jump into that, here's the pictures. in 1990, it was my first time visit China at that time. So this picture really is from the bottom looking at the Lujiazui in Shanghai. So you can see that the Lujiazui was kind of a green field from that perspective. But then 2013, the same location, the photo look at the Lujiazui is complete with lots of skyscraper, with lots of tall building from the perspective. So that's only take place within 20 years. So how significant transformation, how significant growth from the market perspective. So in 2007, the Ecolab China celebrated its 20th anniversary. At that time, Ecolab China was a wholly owned subsidiary of Ecolab Inc., a Fortune 500 company providing cleaning, sanitation, food safety, and infection prevention product and service to the food service, food and beverage processing, healthcare, and hospitality market in more than 160 countries. So overall, you think about the Fortune 500 company with significant global coverage and driving critical related food, water, health, etc. And then so for the Ecolab China at that time, the situation is very different kind of pictures. So the customer view that our offering is a kind of commodity, and then they really come in with a lower price to drive the shares. And then the Ecolab China was not growing fast, and then so had an insignificant share from the perspective. And then the business was lose money with a negative margin. And then internal audit, internal control, really the grossly inadequate from the perspective. So that's kind of a significant contrast. It's the big market, fast growing, but we are not really there. So if you were at that time leading the business in China, what would you have done? Are you going to carry the strategy, doing the better, or are you going to do lower price to compete? However, think about the operation have operating loss. So if you lower your price, are you going to create a bigger loss from the perspective? Or are you going to just think about, maybe it's not a market for me, so recommend to sell the business and exit the market from the perspective? Or will you do the different way to develop, activate strategy to rapidly transform the business? Or none of the above? So for us, we actually focus on driving the transformation and to create a significant win from the perspective. Let me articulate how they really do that. So first things really come back to focus on the customer centric, what the customer really wants, what the customer really needs. And I recall that immediately I call lots of the key customers, reach out to the CEOs. The first thing they say to me, okay, you are the commodity offering. My purchase from you is so small. Why you are spending time on me? Don't waste my time, which is kind of alarming or significant, concerning kind of a statement from the key customers. So we have to do a soul searching, thinking about what will be a different direction we're heading to. So I will articulate that further. And then the external mega trends, what really is happening in the market? What are the critical, the mega trends we have to really think about and the leverage or take the opportunity, driving the future, create the value for the society and make the positive differences. So I will talk about that a little bit further from the perspective. And on top of that, we also need to think about what are really the internal priority, what are our strengths, how can we really make the differences from the perspective. It's not that everything is for us. So that's kind of component we think about and then consider from the perspective. So the key things are really customer-centric. Make sure you don't just focus on internal, you have to focus on both the customer, external, and internal capability to make the differences. The other kind of guiding principle we think about really a successful business really need to have make the win-win-win-win for all the key stakeholders. If you only have a customer wins, you may not have the operating profit. Will the company sustain for a while? Probably not. If you only have a company win, you're not adding the value to the customer. Will that the business ongoing? Probably not. If you have everything else going quite well, but you are not really adding value to the society. You may be irrelevant after a while. So that's kind of a flavor. I hope you give you some consideration about the why we talk about a successful business need to be achieve a win-win-win-win for the customers, associate, the company, and the society. So within that kind of a framework guiding principle, we really focus on, in order to make the bigger impact, we have to really driving what are the core value creation to the society and how to build a high performance team to really driving that through. And then utilize our market winning capability, create a bigger impact from there. So with that said, so how we really drive, we actually create a kind of the vision with the five major pillars and driving that through. The vision really want to be market leaders, create significant share value for the society from the perspective. And then why is the need to drive the people, strategy, execution, positioning, infrastructure? Because if you're missing any one of those critical pillars, you cannot really make the things become reality. So let's use an example, the people. If you don't have engaged team, you are not going to drive a high performing team. You are not going to deliver the outperformance from the perspective. So when I moved to China, I observed the team. I understand the team, their priority, every associate, their priority really focus on their relationship with managers. So if that's the case, the relationship with managers are doing well, they probably will have a better career, they have better outcome from the perspective. However, that's very different from what the company really want to drive, create value, driving the growth. So if we don't pivot that, you are not going to make the differences. So for the people side, we focus on total reward. We change the compensation from the fixed compensation to significant variable income from the perspective. We reward for the performance. If you perform well, then you will be recognized, you will get paid. And on top of that, we created the recognition program. So as you know, we're a B2B company. We have more than half our associate really the customer facing. So with all the associate with customer facing perspective, if they able to outperform their budget by 15% each quarter, they will be recognized as Super Sales Club member. If they are in the Super Sales Club member consecutively more than 1 quarter, 2 quarters, 3 quarters, 4 quarters, they have different perk, different recognition from the perspective. So we not only pay for the performance, we drive the recognition really significant, activate that kind of growth momentum from the perspective. And on top of that, we also help the associate driving engagement. If everyone all have aspiration, what their future, what will be the growth of their potential they want to realize. So we have their skill map developed. We also help them understand what direction they want to head to, what will be the expected or desired skill set from the perspective. So helping understand the gap, but provide them tool to minimize the gap. So we have significant people engagement. We have a way less turnover compared to the market from the perspective. So that's kind of people side. From the strategy, as a company, we're really the premium value creation provider in the market. So even though the competitor really driving a lower pricing to gain shares, we want to really pursue the premiumization kind of strategy. The China is growing fast, so we could move the market to the higher standard, and then we stay the high standard really to capture the market from the perspective. So the key component really think about, as I talked about earlier, customer view us as kind of commodity. We have to transform that, change that. So we focus on the food safety, public health, sustainability. That's the 3 dimensions really focus on the driving transformation. Let's use the food safety example. So we start to develop food safety solutions. We start to really prepare what the market going to come. And then we also utilize the opportunity because China going to host the 2008 Beijing Olympic Games. So from the perspective, the government want to make sure within those time period, there's no foodborne illness outbreak at all. So with our solution collaboration, working with the government agency, work with the food service provider together, the 2 million meals served within 2 weeks of Beijing Olympic Game period. No foodborne illness outbreak, no cross-contamination issues at all. So that's also strengthened our position in the market. Then after that, the baby formula management issues in 2008 created significant food safety crisis in China. So it used to be the customers that they don't want to talk to us. They suddenly look at us, at our capability and driving food safety progress. They have the reporter, inspector at their side critique their operations. They call us, say, hey, please come in to help us. Utilize the science, utilize scientific facts to clarify what's the true issues, what's not, and help them to clear their name or drive the improvement from the perspective. So gradually we move from the commodity to the food safety leaders, but we don't stop just there. And then we look at our leadership position and start to really help the whole society thinking about what are the critical guiding principle for the whole society to continue move forward on the food safety perspective. So we advocate the 7 guiding principle. We create a 7-star food safety and public health kind of alliance, working together with government agency, with the industry association, with the key companies, etc., and then driving significant transformation. We even educate the public to understand what are the key issues, what are the misunderstanding from the perspective, elevate the whole market standard and move forward, which is the linking to the premiumization, linking to the positioning. So similar to that, we also follow that through with the sustainability, the Shanghai World Expo, etc. So if you are interested, we could even have a chance to follow up from the perspective, but that gives you the flavor, how we really drive the transformation from the perspective. So in terms of the infrastructure perspective, we build the training centers to develop our people. We established the regional headquarters in Shanghai, that's in 2009. And then we built out the global R&D center, which is at the 2011. And then open up the mega plant, which is one of the largest the manufacturing site outside of North America at the time. So that's kind of infrastructure, and on top of that, we implement SAP, et cetera, to make that move and then pivot to the outcome. So even during those kind of fast growing business period, the whole external market is not a smooth ride from the perspective. You could see that 2008, 2009 was a great recession, which is driving significant downturn, not only in the North America, but also in China as well. And on top of that, definitely during the time, there are lots kind of food issues. The U.S. import food from China and they articulate some issues. Then there is a kind of a retaliation. So the China AQSIQ were blocking certain importing from the U.S. to China. And then so those things is not smooth ride neither. And on the right-hand side, you can see that picture of lots of people wearing the mask because of H1N1, H5N1, etc. So you have swine flu, avian flu, and then the situation really the public health is a big concern. You also have the Sichuan, Wenchuan, the earthquake, and then the below that you see that the baby formula issues, etc., etc. So external market is not a smooth ride, but even with that, with our strategy and executions, the high performing team really driving significant progress. So from a sales perspective, we moved more than 7 times from the perspective, versus China GDP was only growing 57%. And the profitability size, we improved by 2,000 basis points within first 3 years, even during the global recession period. So that means every dollar we sell, we deliver 20 cents more profit to the bottom line. And then combined with a fast growing business, so that's significant kind of the enterprise value creation from that perspective. So we not only doing the business performing well, we also get recognition from the market as the best human resource company, best food safety company, best sustainability company, corporate responsibility, talent company, etc. Innovation. So from all aspects is that we are doing the value creation the right way and being recognized as a trust partners by the market. So that's kind of a transformation as we talked about. Even the China rising doesn't mean that all the company will be a smooth ride. And then you have to think about what's the pivot, what's the transformation, what are the difference you could make from the perspective. So let me pivot into the second topic. As we know, the recent kind of the tension between the US and China continue to intensify from the perspective. So what really triggered that? I think there are a few areas we could think about that. The US is the number one economic power. However, China continued to narrow the gap, chasing up. So the gap is narrowing, and with the increasing concern about the competitiveness, or is that fair competitive, the environment from the perspective. Then technology leadership, China really claimed several areas. I think the Huawei 5G and the AI development, etc. That's just a few examples. With those development, we'll continue kind of what would be a technology leadership as of the world, and then how would I drive from the perspective. And the third area is kind of the global manufacturing center. China definitely had that spot. However, would that be the looking at the bring job back to the United States or other countries that create a tension between the West and then the China from the perspective. Then the other area is international influence. Definitely, I think the US or West are really focused on the international influence different way, versus China really focused on the Belt and Road, utilize economic influence driving the impact from the perspective. So that's kind of also creates slight tension from there. And the other area will be the global challenges and values. So people talk about human rights, and then would that be solving and challenging in the right way, et cetera, et cetera. So those are a few areas, I think, the underlying situation and the triggers for the US-China tension from there. However, when the 2015, the China announced that they made in China 2025, and then provoking or pushing the China leadership in the information technology, automation, robotic, and then the couple different areas, which definitely further awakened the West in terms of the concern or competition from the perspective. So in the recent years, currently the China 14-5 years, they really reiterate the China's kind of a super technology superpower from the perspective. So the 14-5 plan really focused on the pivot from the quantity to quality, with the quality and the driving through the people's well-being, the green sustainability technology, and then within that the technologies area, not only on the new energy, but also the AI 4.0, quantum computing, or even the neuroscience, biotech, etc. That's all in the China try to be superpower from the perspective. And that created a competition tension from the perspective. So if we look at what's really China focused in recent years. So from the belief perspective, really is studying that she's a principal, follow the Communist Party. From the international affair, really talk about that China can look at the world head up. From the economic perspective, really not only driving the economic quality growth, but talk about significantly on the common prosperity. From the COVID perspective, China aiming to be a zero. So implement the zero dynamics is very different on the Western world on the open coexist approach from the perspective. From the innovation, China want to be self-sufficient for domestic consumption, inspired to lead the next generation of technology and innovation. As we talked about earlier, with the US or the West, so let China succeed from that perspective. Digital-wise, really advancing the digitalization, AI, automation, and world-class infrastructure. From the sustainability perspective, China really talked about the carbon commitments, and then even implement the double control, and then expanding the renewable hydro, nuclear power, et cetera, et cetera. And then from the military perspective, advancing the weapon development, such as the hypersonic kind of missile, which is leading from the perspective. And then they even talk about they want to stand up for the West at the bully, that's at the from the China's aspect or perspective. So that's China recent years kind of focus from the perspective. So if you look at the US, how the US reaction or action from that perspective during the Trump period really talked about significantly make the American great again, want to bring the job back to the US and start to implement tariff and then try to minimize the competitive gap from the perspective. During the Biden period, really start to talk about lots kind of international alliance, not only from the military defense area, but also on the economic collaboration, etc. In the recent development like a CHIP X, and then really focus on banning lots of advanced chip selling to Chinese companies, and then also banning these US citizens or residents to work in the Chinese kind of chip-related industry or company from the perspective. It's just the intensifying on the technology competition and what the action from the perspective. The other area is kind of recently the White House published the National Security Strategy, which is really put the #1 priority as out-competing China going forward. So that's kind of you could see that what the China focus, how the US reaction from a perspective example, intensifying the tension between the China and the US. So to summarize that kind of implication, you could think about it internationally or cross-border perspective. It's the moving from the traditional trade war to a technology war right now. And then would that become a new Cold War? We don't know, but that's kind of development, the moving toward that. But even within that or under that kind of situation, you have seen a little bit kind of the migration on the industrial activity or supply chain activity. Some companies start moving out of China. So labor intensive, definitely moving to Southeast Asia or India, or move back to Mexico as a regional player from the perspective. Even on the technology advancing side, because of what availability and the consideration, there are start to a little bit kind of shifting, even on the Apple production, et cetera, et cetera. And then for the China domestic, for sure, the Chinese government want to utilize promote the China consumption going forward, and then will create a kind of the supporting economic growth going forward. However, with the zero COVID policy, so there are some significant uncertainty of the economic growth from the perspective. You look at the various banks, that the assumption or projection for the China GDP growth is not going to be reaching the 5.5% this year as the Chinese government's goal from the perspective. So that's kind of with the significant uncertainty or intensifying international cross-border perspective, but even with China domestically, there are some kind of concern from their perspective because uncertainty is very high. So how we should think about to deal with that? What would be a strategic consideration based on those kind of effects? We talked about the tension intensifying. So the consideration is definitely not the black or white, just one approach to go forward. So likely that U.S.-China collaboration or the behavior could be summarized into a 3 category, would be the multi-approach from the perspective. The category 1 would be the collaboration. So collaboration areas such as climate change or UN Sustainable Development Goals or other kind of people well-being, the area will be considered as kind of, there's no need to compete. It's all what would be the better goods from the perspective, make the world become a better place. That will be a collaboration area. But even with that collaboration area, so I think the lots of collaboration area has been diminished or the pause in 2022. The second category is the competition. So I think the economic growth is kind of competition area, or the global value-added manufacturing, would that be shifting back to US or doing different things? That's the competition area. Or the certain industry which would not be deemed as a kind of a high sensitive business, such as renewable energies or consumer goods or industrial activities, and those will be in the competition category. Or domestic infrastructure or space development, that's a competition area. Then the third thing is really the confrontation. So that will be escalate to beyond the competition, then will be more action related to that. That will be such as a sensitive technology platform or business like the 5G, the semiconductors or AI or digital payments, quantum computing, biotech, etc. Those will have a significant activity. You could see the significant actions from both sides driving that through. And then the international influence will be confrontation. So with the DeFi or the different kind of alliance, especially relate to the South China Sea or the different kind of the development in different areas like North Korea, etc. The Xinjiang, the human rights, I think the topic was the big topic over the last few a year, but gradually is continue from the perspective. So Xinjiang, Hong Kong, Taiwan will be the confrontation area, and then the certain value system or culture. So that's kind of approach. If you have the understanding what will be fit into the collaboration, what will be fit into the competition, what will be fit into the confrontation, that will help to develop a better, clear strategy. Are you in which category? What the key thing to do from that perspective? So the global company might have a few options in China. Depends on what category they are in and what things they are thinking about. So I summarize into the three options. One is a continued globalization journey, and then maximize operational efficiency, minimize the cost, because to shifting the whole supply chain out of China is not as straightforward, or it's not going to be very low risk on the other hand as well. So one of the options really continue globalization journey, depends on where you are, what industry you are in. The second category is to really optimize the China business for Chinese market. So China itself is going to continue to grow and then will be the important market for many business. So think about how to invest local capability for growing Chinese market and driving the local business outperformance from the perspective to win the market. And then some business you think about is the minimize local exposures and migrate to other countries from the perspective. So that's kind of a layout. What are the options out there? And how do we really think about from the Ecolab perspective? If you look at the Ecolab, we are not the B2B, we are not the B2C, we're B2B. So we're not a confrontation. We protect the people and the vital resource with a purpose impact on water, food, health, and the climate. So we're in the collaboration category. We're not considered as high tech. So think as kind of a battle of the area. So we are not a confrontation. In China, we are creating value for Chinese people and the local community by building a cleaner, safer, healthier community and advocating sustainable and efficient solutions. So with that, we are considered as kind of collaboration area. We committed to invest in China. In China, we have been a part of the Chinese business community for a long time and have localized our operation for years. So including manufacturing plant, regional headquarters, etc. So definitely not a confrontation. So we commit to investing our associates, enabling them to realize potential and deploying the global talent for winning globally. So we're not a confrontation. And then we bring the global capability and advocating global standard, which is driving the people's well-being. So we are in the collaboration area. So that's kind of a following what I summarized earlier, what the approach from the collaboration, competition, and confrontation, and how we Ecolab fit into those categories and how should we drive. And so because of that, our unique situation, our unique positioning, we are really the protecting the people's health and then protecting the business health, protecting the planet health from the perspective, and then driving the food, health, water, climate, and we are really adding value, which is in some way really helping the society, helping the market from that perspective. And we're being recognized, as I talked about earlier, not only from the sustainability, food safety, but also on the innovation, on the shared value creation, and the corporate responsibility, human resources, etc. we're doing the right things in the right way and then being recognized as a trust partner from the perspective. So back to that, if we look at the intensifying tension, the whole world is not that straightforward, not that easy. If you look at the global economy is slowing down further, and which with the energy crisis, with geopolitical issues, and with the kind of the outlook is kind of darkening from the perspective. The U.S. Has certain situation, the European side has certain situation, but China, as we talked about, U.S.-China tension continue to intensifying, and then the zero COVID policy creates some kind of uncertainty from the perspective. So based on that, based on our unique situation, we think about it, we should do the China for sure, because Chinese market will be sizable for us, and then we need to make sure we're positioned to win that. And then otherwise, the cross the board from the perspective will be a wait and see to see how fast we're moving forward from the perspective. So hopefully that gives you the flavor how the tension means and how do we really think about from the tension complexity implications, summarizing different category, and how do we analyze Ecolab situation and then create a strategy move forward. And that's my share today, and then we'll be open up for some Q&A.
Wow, thank you so much. That was fascinating. I really appreciate you sharing your journey in China, and the strategies that Ecolab is taking is obviously making it quite successful in meeting some of these extraordinary times and extraordinary challenges. So let's get to the Q&A. The first question we have is, what if win-win-win-win sometimes internally conflict to each other? What is your suggested priority or action plan, particularly when entering a new market?
I think the win-win-win-win is really the guiding principle, as we talked about from the perspective. For example, if you are the company in the only cover one dimension, you are not going to reach the sustainable stage, because all the other dimension will create the issues. So when you have internal conflicts from the perspective, focus on what will be area to get aligned. If you don't have a common goal, you are not able to have a high performing team driving forward. So that's kind of component. Think about how to get a common goal, how to drive alignment, and we'll reach out to as kind of win-win-win-win, the sustainable stage.
Thank you. Can you comment on China's relationship with Russia? It seems that China is moving closer to Russia and further from the US. How is this likely to impact China's growth in the future?
I think that at the current stage, that's my personal opinion, okay, just my personal thought from there. At the current stage, China definitely are taking some advantage on getting the discount price on the oil or natural gas from Russia versus the market price. So they will have a certain advantage from the perspective. And on top of that, the Russia definitely try to work closer to China. So that will have a certain tie from there. And then would that be trigger on more tension going forward? And then what will be a society really need to do will be the area we need to watch out. And I do personally hope all the global leaders will think about how to de-escalate and what will be the right thing for the whole world and the society move forward from that perspective.
Thank you. As a global company, is there a way that you can ease tensions between the US and China? Is there a channel that the governments could hear your voice?
We are participating a different discussion from a perspective, and we will utilize our channels to share the thoughts with the government leaders. I think the healthy competition is good, but then beyond the healthy competition, the key focus on will be how to de-escalate and how to move back to the healthy competition from the perspective. And then so as I talk about from the collaboration, how can we enhance the collaboration area more? Because more dialogue, the more collaboration, then you will have the moving toward to the healthier relationship. And then the competition, maintain the healthy competition and the de-escalating confrontation.
And can you please elaborate on the society element of the win-win-win-win strategy principle? How does a company best think about their role in benefiting society?
Let me use an example. If you are a tobacco company, okay, you might have a good price in the market, the customer happy about the smoking tobacco. And then your associate might be okay with that, and your company was profit. But the tobacco really is that going to be a long-term share value for the society? Maybe, maybe not. In my opinion, I think that's kind of a consideration you have to think about. Are you really creating value for the society in the long term? If you are not really adding value in the long term, even though you might be doing quite well right now, are you going to be relevant 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road?
So then, does the majority of global companies plan to stay in China, or do you think they'll move out in the next 3 years?
I would say my personal opinion, as I lay out on the global companies 3 options, you're going to see that there are certain companies doing one of each. So it's not going to be one of all or nothing. So you will have a certain company will be continue globalization journey, stay in China. You will have some company will be changing their approach, more focused on China for China. And then you have some company really migrate toward to different market.
So how does the China for China market impact Ecolab's global strategy, especially cross-market leverage in innovation or customer solutions?
I think our consideration used to be China is a huge market. You have maybe the preferential selection from the perspective. So if all the return on investment assessments equal, you'll put China first in the past. Now, so if at all the numbers is similar, then you will look at based on what the return on investment decision from the perspective.
Is China still facing a great downward pressure on the economy since 2022? China's economy has obviously declined and unemployment of young people is very serious. Facing these economic pressures, the Chinese government still emphasizes on taking the road of double cycle. May I ask you, will China be more integrated into the world's values or continue to stick to strong control?
I would say based on the current the development, I view there are significant uncertainty because we don't really have clarity about what will be happening most likely over the next 12 months. But I think if we have chance to revisit that with some of the clarity over the next few 6 to 12 months, then we could have a more clear direction per your question. But based on the indication, because of significant uncertainty, and then the economic policy from the perspective, definitely, I think the downward pressure definitely will retain for a while.
Thank you, Sam, for this insightful presentation. This person is an associate with Ecolab and asks that you please comment on the impact of European business competitors and their seemingly better position or political relationship with China.
I would say that we are part of the community development. We work with all the key stakeholders, including the government, over the years. We talk about the people's well-being. We talk about food safety. We talk about public health. We talk about sustainability. All those key things really align with government agenda. So we are considered as a kind of a critical share value creation enterprise or global citizen from the perspective. We help the society increase the standard. So overall, I would say we maintain the kind of as a thought leaders, help the society to move forward. And we advocate a lot of kind of a new concept, what will be the key collaboration in the market. And we are hoping to continue driving that shared value creation, make the positive impact on the society.
Thank you. If corrupt officialdom is a problem in a given market, how should a business address that issue?
I would say that thinking about this way, China has the Anti-Corruption Act for a while. So maybe there used to be some areas not allow us to even consider. Those areas are open because the barrier gradually being removed. So I think from our perspective is that the continued focus on what will be rising for the society, what will be rising for the market, and then doing the right thing for the right time at the right place.
Okay, uncertainty seems to be the key word of fiscal year 2022 or year 2022 in China from all aspects. What's Ecolab's point of view to address such uncertainties, economic, political environment there?
I think the uncertainty is that a challenge, but uncertainty doesn't mean that there's no opportunity. Uncertainty doesn't equal to the crisis. So focusing on what will be the opportunity, what will be the customer needs, and how can you lead the market to add value, especially we are in the people's well-being, we are driving sustainability, which is that every countries or the business really try to focus on, and then so we could leverage those things, create a value, and then make the positive differences.
And then how do you handle the supply chain issues outside of China? In China, the supply chain network is established, but outside of China, it will be hard to get the same support.
For Ecolab, we have established the kind of the local network for a long time. So sometimes we think about the shipping the chemical across the ocean may not be the most efficient way. So we try to manufacture local for local or regional for regional from the perspective. And so the significantly different than many other industry, they have a significant centralized global supply chain from the perspective. We do follow the regional for regional approach, which allow us to go through the COVID resilience phase successfully, and which also give us a kind of a better sustainability outcome and a better competitiveness based on uncertain environment.
In my own interactions with Ecolab, I've always been very impressed with how Ecolab has really invested in its customers and its clients in China. Really, I know you presented a lot of awards that you've received, but can you comment a little bit about the type of activity that you do with your customers to strengthen their business and to bring them up to global standards?
So let me give you a few examples. So even on the food safety doesn't mean that you say, here's a global solution, you adopt and you know what's going on. It's absolutely not that way. We have to work on educate not only the business side, what will be the global standard really means, how to really driving towards that, what are the tools you need to prepare, what's the company culture you need to have, what will be the SOP you need to establish to make sure things happen not only once, get your certificates or ISO certificates, but happen every day, because of the food safety is the ongoing business from the perspective. You also need to have the market, the public understanding, so they will take the actions and then make the right choices from the perspective. So we have significant working together with the industry and then driving that education process. We even collaborate with the University of Minnesota in multiple kind of training sections, and then bring in even with the educate the government agencies what the global standard really means, and then facilitate the exchange on the US FDA and the China FDA to talk about what the global standard really all about. We participate on the conference to share the global thought leadership standard really means, but also and facilitate the panel discussion, allow people to understand that. So I think that working with the ecosystem, with all the multiple stakeholders, and then driving that kind of the journey is kind of important, because you need to have all key stakeholders understand. Otherwise, you cannot really make the movement as like that.
Thank you. We had a couple of questions along this line, but let me sort of rephrase. But is there, how is Ecolab impacted in its work in China and globally due to the tensions, I would say, between US, China, and Taiwan, or typically just China and Taiwan?
I would say the key component really is that we are adding value to the society. So focus on what we have control and where can we make the differences. And then for the others, we have no control. Why need to pay too much the attention toward to, because you cannot make the difference from the perspective. So we focus on those areas as we talk about if attention intensify, and then how can we really focus on the common goal. If the society want to drive the people's well-being, protecting people on the food safety or clean water or sustainability outcome, that will be area we focus on to make the differences, regardless of what different kind of political direction they are heading to. And that's still underlying value, core share value. It's still the same. Focus on the common goal, positive things we can make the differences.
And then what do you think the biggest risk you're facing in China or outside of China is at the moment, and what's your plan?
I would say if you look at the overall global environment, there are significant challenges. So we typically look at the mega trend and the challenges in the kind of current and the wave. So current, that means that we're ongoing happening. So like aging population, as we talked about, those are the current. It's not going to be 1 year coming and then the other year disappear. But we also have significant wave. I think right now we have the inflation, we have energy crisis, we have the ongoing interest rate increase, etc., geopolitical issues. Those are, we call it the wave, because common goal sometimes will become the current if the moving in that certain direction. So those are the challenges we have to think about, we have to deal with. So from that perspective, really is that the continue focus on create value through the current, and then handle or deal with the wave smartly. So you don't be overwhelmed by the wave. You will turn the wave, become your tailwind to create more value from perspective. That's a kind of regardless think about globally or China, that will be a situation we are moving forward.
And look in your crystal ball and tell us how you think the U.S. is going to continue to respond to China's increasingly strong political and economic strength.
I view that the current tension will continue, especially the technology war is significantly started already. So unless there is the leaders really working on the escalating efforts, that war will continue for a while. So if you think from that perspective, over the next 2 years, that the technology will be continuing intensifying in some way, and hopefully the leader will think about what will be the win-win for both sides and driving to make the world become a better place.
Thank you. This has been a really excellent discussion. I appreciate your very your time with the answers to all these really wonderful questions. The last one I'd like to share with you is this person has asked, and maybe I'll answer this question, to share your presentation with her colleagues. I think if you are really interested, you can certainly find a recording on our website in the next several days. Our website is www.chinacenter, www.chinacenter.umn.edu. And we will post that under our webinar, Considering China webinar tab. So look for it there. If you still don't find it, email, we'll send you a link. Okay. Thank you, Sam. Thanks for your time today. And thanks everyone for joining us. Have a great day.
Thanks for having me.